Hi, Mohan. Welcome back to the Software People Stories.
Hi, Shiv. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. This conversation is probably a little different from the ones that we otherwise have. Thought we'll do a
Yeah.
little bit of a theme around this time of the year when people start reflecting on the year that was and making plans or resolutions for the new year and all that.
Mm.
So, essentially, I would just wanted to understand what is your approach? I mean, do you do such planning at all? I know that in your role as a coach, you help others identify some goals, help them make progress, reflect, all that. So, what do you do for your own, whether it is in a personal or in a professional spaces?
I don't wait for a new year to sort of happen, for some of these things, because these things happen in a very dynamic fashion. So, for example, uh, I sort of took a break from very active corporate life this February 2023.
Mm,
Uh, it happened because of a culmination of a thought process which was happening for quite some time, maybe a couple of years.
mm,
Um, And of course, coaching was very close to my heart, and this was a good opportunity for me to sort of diversify in that area. So generally, what I try to do is I sort of reflect as we sort of draw closer to the year. I sort of reflect on what were some of the big things that I saw through the year, and what can I sort of do ahead, but at a very high level. But sort of really don't do this as an annual sort of a planning exercise, because I think we do enough of it in a typical corporate world, that we call it as year end or financial year end, whichever way, right?
mm.
Sort of one way to look at the road ahead based on what the year has been. So yeah, in a way, it's very ingrained in our process. But when it comes to person, as an individual, uh, this is more of an ongoing process rather than waiting for an year end kind of a event.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I've heard you know, both the year end as a major event or as a major milestone to reflect. And there are others who feel that well, we have the financial year. In fact, some of us, at least I try to look at at least a very brief reflection
Mm.
uh, on my birthday. Okay.
Ah,
Uh,
that's nice.
saying at least it's more a personal milestone, and then see.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, it's nice that you have your own frequent reflections and all that. Uh, the one question is, does the frequency matter or has that made any difference for you? I mean, how far ahead do you look at or how far back do you again reflect on?
Very good question, actually. Uh, I I I think the frequency, if it is very high, meaning you always have your thinking hat on, it really helps shape your options and eventually decision making. So I sort of believe that you must always keep thinking. When I say thinking, thinking in a productive way and not just from a problem solving perspective.
Mhm.
Secondly, there is that aspect of how far you want to sort of think
Mm,
through. Generally, I don't think too far to it, because there are a lot of. So one thing that I've learned is that you have to always provide for things to go astray, uh, sort of look at things that were never anticipated, the unknown unknowns. So I really don't. If I were to put a time frame, I don't look at anything beyond 3 months. And even those 3 months are really about what are the major events that are happening within the next 3 months. So, for example, if you see, it would be around, a certain renovation that I did within for my work very recent for my home very recently, which had sort of a, how do I sort of get this done within the next 3 months, 4 months kind of a
mm,
situation. What is the next big family event that is happening, and how far am I going to see? Is it happening in the next 2 3 months? What are some of the important client engagements that are coming up at a broad level, and what do we need to do, kind of things. That's how I look at it, but I really don't look beyond that. The fact that the thought process is always going on, when you are walking, when you take your walks, or when you sort of talk to people, um, the background processes that keep that thought process, I think, helps steer your options and decisions more than very active kind of a planning exercise. The active kind of planning exercise is more tactical, more day to day, but the cognitive process is really on all the time, and the time horizon is not too far, just about maybe 3 months at max.
So, what are some typical triggers or maybe events or causes that move these thoughts into action? For example, you mentioned that in February this year, you had taken a decision to a transition into a new, let's say, balance of work, whatever.
Correct.
But you also mentioned that you've been thinking about it maybe for the last 2 years or so.
Correct.
So is it more like what we call as the last straw on the camel's back? Or was there something else that helped you transition from thinking to actually taking a step?
So like I said, the constant thought process that is going on, in your head, I think helps you crystallize your options, provide clarity to what you want to do. And actually, it's very interesting if you sort of if you traverse your thought process backwards, you would actually see that, you actually jumped so many hops, you changed so many options, you discarded certain things on the way, you brought in some new things on the way. It's very interesting sort of reflect back on, the reverse traversal of your thought process. So the aspect of thinking all the time helps you provide that clarity. The actual act of taking certain decisions, like for example, in my case, when I sort of got down off the treadmill, if you will, and then started walking on my own feet, right? That particular trigger that happened in February was a culmination of thought processes and clarity that had sort of accumulated over a period of time. Certain triggers happened, so you sort of brought it right, correctly. I mean, so there are certain triggers which are there. In my case, the triggers were around what was the general health of the business that I was running. There was the second level of leadership that was already in place. You look at the kind of discussions that you have with your seniors in the company, your mentors, and they seem to sort of concur with some of those things. So you take that as leading indicators, right? All of those things then happen and then help you take a certain. So these are the triggers that help you take a certain decision that you sort of, from A to B. So to bring all of this together, as long as you're thinking of certain important aspects all through, that gives you the option to refine your options, bring in clarity to decision making. As far as timing is concerned, it's just another event, and that depends on certain triggers. As in this case that I mentioned, what were the triggers? So that's how I look at it. I'm not a very big fan of when people say I very consciously manage my career. I know exactly what I would like to do. I hear them out, but at least when I sort of correlate that with my experience, I find that a little different from that my own preferred ways of doing it. And sometimes I even wonder whether we as people, given the sort of VUCA world that we live in, whether that level of exactness and clarity is even possible. But that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, you kind of touched upon a thought that was crossing my mind as you said some triggers or something that happened. But you also mentioned that you always make a provision for, or you anticipate that something's not going as per plan. Right? Now, with that kind of an approach where it's probably one of accommodation, one of flexibility, and responding to the current situations and so on, versus this desire for more details, the desire for more clarity, desire for certainty, etc. When you're particularly looking at maybe a new idea or a new area to explore, right? How do you not prevent or maybe hold yourself from getting into the analysis paralysis trap, or something new that comes up, not getting enamored by, let's say, the flavor of the day or this thing.
Yeah.
Once you picked up something, and of course, normally for such decision, there is nothing as a right or a wrong decision. It's more about the indecision or decision.
Right.
And since you're open to reviewing that based on situations, and how do you kind of put some guardrails on not going all over the place?
Correct. It's a very good point, Shiv. So personally, I believe in one aspect. It's an abstract concept. It's called as the golden optimal. The golden optimal is somewhere in between here, and then you operate in certain extremes here, which is your sort of strengths, by and large, your areas of strengths. And then the other aspect of it is areas generally you're not very good at. And the golden optimal is somewhere in between, right? Now, I'm not trying to say that this is really about individual skills, it's as a combination of various things. It's a combination of skills, it's a combination of situations, it's a combination of what you can control versus what you cannot control. But look at it from this very simplistic view, that there are two extremities and then there is somewhere a sort of a middle ground, which is an abstract concept. You can even call it perfection for the lack of a suitable term, but I rather not use the word perfection. I call this as the golden optimum.
Okay.
I always try to see that if we are somewhere in bit towards the extremities, and if we are consciously trying to push towards the golden optimal, it will drive a lot of things which sort of bring balance to the overall situation. So, for example, by very innately, you may be a person who is very meticulous. You may like to plan till the last T's and I's are crossed. But then if you're sort of aware of this conceptual aspect of golden optimal, you will also realize that it is not a perfect world. You got to make some provisions, even though you're sort of trying to make it as perfect as you can, right? If not for this golden optimal, you would have said that I've done a perfect plan and I'm sort of ready to send my troops in, and they will start firing in from the trenches. And suddenly something goes wrong. It starts raining, and your bullets don't fire. Right? Those things can happen, which are basically uncontrollables. You probably thought about it, but you can't do much about it. You keep watching it, and that creates a lot of frustration. So this golden optimal concept brings in a lot of it basically a conscious attempt to achieve balance. And also, as part of the balance, also provide for some scope to fail and then recover. So I try to sort of look at this very consciously when I plan. So, for example, if I'm planning for the next family function, if I'm planning for my next coaching sessions, if I'm planning for the next presentation with the client as to what to do, I try and look at some of these aspects in terms of what is the balance. Sometimes I leave certain things to instinct also, because I'm aware of it. My instincts will take over and prevail over the situation. And if the situation is overwhelmingly against me, I'm reasonably confident there will be a second chance for me to come back, right? I mean, things are not watertight in this world, right? So basically, this concept of golden optimal drives, it gives me a lot of comfort to operate and sort of take things by stride. I've been very lucky to work with two bosses. One was a perfectionist who would plan so meticulously his town hall meetings, client presentations, and things like that. But for some reason, if the team meeting didn't go as, there were teams issues, the whole thing will fall apart as far as he is concerned. And the other person was very instinctive. He will sort of wing it by and sort of take it in his stride. And I found that's how I actually landed this concept of golden optimal. I thought that these guys are very successful in their own respect, but they
Mhm.
also were blind spotted to certain areas.
Mm.
And that's how I discovered this aspect of golden optimal. This is my own sort of creation, or I coined this term. But this is something I try to consciously practice based on what I saw of these two people, and they sort of helped me come up with this concept.
That's very nice. So coming back to this whole concept of planning and setting goals, and in the context of many of the New Year resolutions, they are probably not followed through because either there's not
Yeah,
fulfillment or it is not one's natural way of working and is something that one wants to do differently or change.
correct.
How would you suggest, or what would you suggest that individuals can do to attach a little more seriousness to it?
Mm,
So at least trying and not succeeding is one thing, but not trying is probably not productive. Because then it is this whole reflection or planning is a waste of time.
I agree. I agree. Again, it's a very good point, Kashiv. So while personally I have not practiced it, right, I do feel that there is a merit in looking at sort of the year and in ways to reflect and then sort of see what's the sort of road ahead. I think it's a good point in time, I think, to sort of take stock of various things. Personally, I have not practiced it, but I think conceptually, I think there is some merit in it. The reason why I feel things fall through is that we do it in a very mechanical fashion. What I mean by that is, if we said to ourselves that I'm going to wait for the year end to start thinking about this, yeah, we may buy the sexiest of diaries and then we may actually put certain points on it, but 2 months down the line, it will fall through because it was a mechanical activity.
Mhm.
Which is where I go back to my earlier point that the cognitive process in terms of what and how is always running, even as a even if it is running as a background process, it is
Mhm.
always on.
Mhm.
The idea is to sort of bring through that, and maybe during the year you want to basically do some reflection, talk to certain people,
Mhm.
or you want to sit in a quiet place and write down certain things. Journaling is a good thing to do when it
Mhm.
comes to these aspects. I truly believe journaling really helps bring clarity to
Mhm.
thoughts. So that way, the year-end planning is an opportunity to do this much more consciously. But then if the year-end planning is really about, okay, I'll get to that and I'll start doing it, then I think it becomes a ritual.
Mhm.
And that is probably the reason why things do fail and things people don't carry it forward. So just to sort of summarize, the cognitive process is always on, keep it on all the time. Um, use the year end maybe as a facility or a means to do some reflection, to look forward. But don't wait for the new year to happen and start doing certain things, because then it's almost guaranteed that it will not be carried through.
Yeah, I think very practical tips. So staying on the theme of practicality,
Yeah,
since you referred to journaling a couple of times,
sure.
uh, any good practices related to journaling? Maybe more specifically, what I'm trying to understand is because one is the medium where you want to journal, and second, while it is a good outlet to reflect and then maybe clarify your own thoughts and so on, does one benefit from retaining the journals or going back and reviewing before, say, a later session of journaling? Or is it just something that you write and you can throw it away?
Okay. Okay. To start with, maybe I would like to sort of differentiate between journaling and taking notes. Taking notes is really about recording what's going on at that, you know, with a meeting or a situation or whatever. You're just recording. And you're primarily recording because you don't probably trust your memory
Mm.
enough. You don't trust it enough, so you want.
Or you don't want to fall asleep in an interaction. Keep
You want
yourself.
to fall asleep, so you keep yourself busy, and hey, let me not forget. So you sort of so memory, and sort of keeping busy, and that's how you take notes. In my view, journaling is somewhat different from taking notes. If we are active listeners, which we are not, generally we are not, but if we make it an attempt and to be a better listener than the previous event or previous occasion, I have noticed that there is tremendous capacity in the brain to record things and, more importantly, draw insights. Now, you may call them as bias, you may call them as perceptions, etc., etc. And, but then they still innately they are insights to your persona, and you record it, and you record it almost permanently. If you really want to jog your memory, you will be amazed that your brain is actually able to recall some of these insights, recall some of these experiences, even recall some of the smell sensations that you saw, that you felt 20 years ago, right? That's the sort of capacity. So in that kind of situation, what do you journal? You journal your thoughts, you journal your insights, and not sort of the notes kind of a thing, which is basically duplicating those events in a piece of paper or in your notebook. So in my view, journaling is really about recording your thoughts and insights and perceptions as opposed to the event in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I feel reflecting on those insights is always very profitable as opposed to going through your notes. Notes were very useful for us, or for me, for the purpose of writing examinations. But journaling is somewhat different. That is how I would differentiate between the two. And therefore, the benefit of journaling is that you are able to, ultimately what matters for us is our perceptions, our beliefs, and our insights. And if you find that validation through your journal, it brings in confidence, and chances are very high that it will translate into actions and behaviors and things like that. So that is the benefit of journaling. So journaling, in my view, is very different from taking notes for that reason. And that, therefore, that's the benefit, the insights, which can lead to actions and behaviors.
And just before the conversation, you were talking about your style of taking notes, which is more visual. So again, are there approaches that are preferred over other approaches in terms of what you would in a journal?
See, generally, we guys, especially from the software industry, we are used to very sequential mode of thinking. So generally, we write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or bullets, and then it's a very top-down, serialized way of taking notes, because our thinking process is also very serialized. Because your thought process is very serialized, if you made a conscious attempt to write certain things which are in a non-serialized manner, then you are basically exercising your brain to think in a much more lateral way. Sometimes it also brings in aspects of creativity. So generally, I try to use boxes, circles, connecting arrows when I do my journaling, and less of words, more of pictures. Especially in terms of circles, boxes, and arrows and things like that, so that it brings in the essence, and it also brings in the correlation in a much more vivid way. So when you look at your journal, you sort of get a picture. And because it is a picture, you can cover a very wide gamut of things. You can talk about what was the other person's perception, what was the situation that led to that perception. So you basically link certain things, right? If you did not do this, you just take meeting minutes and notes. You generally, out of meeting minutes, it's there for legal purposes, commercial purposes, but how much of insights do you get out of meeting minutes? Very little. So my style of journaling is, yes, pictorial. And I also use arrows to bring in the correlation between insights and thoughts. which is a departure from very serialized way of thinking, which sort of misses out on aspects of that that happened, and you didn't pick it up.
Yeah, very interesting. In fact, one of the things that I had picked up long back was the orientation of the page or the paper. Normally,
Uh-huh.
that if you want to be creative, use landscape. Don't start writing because the portrait orientation forces you
Right.
to kind of think serially or do that in that manner. So I think these have been very, very interesting and useful points. So one curiosity question which I want to ask before we close is
Sure.
whatever, let's say you journal something and you said you use a lot of shapes, is there an overall shape that kind of emerges as a pattern for each of your journal entries? I mean, the specific question I wanted to ask was
Mm.
assuming that you are journaling this conversation that we had,
Right.
right? Uh, there may be a lot of these boxes, arrows, bubbles, circles, and something, etc., etc.
Sure. Sure.
But then, without going into the details, if I just looked at the page, is there something that might stand out or first say that no, this has been like, for instance, sometimes when we doodle, at least when I do, sometimes I find that it is a very kind of either repeating pattern or some shape or something that I have in mind, and eventually it kind of gets filled out, even if it is kind of thing. Sometimes it is totally random. Okay, so it is more triggered based on that curiosity.
Okay. Uh, if I pick up my if I sort of see a pattern, generally irrespective of the length of the conversation or discussion, whatever, right? I find that I don't fill more than a page. I mean, a full page at max, but in general, it is basically half a page. And I'm actually looking at sort of your question actually triggered a thought in my mind to see whether the shape or sort of the layout of the journaling that I do
Yeah.
pictorially, does it convey something? And I probably feel it conveys some things, which is sort of related to my personality, which is I believe in if things are concise, uh, not very elaborate and concise and neat, I always have an appreciation for such things, as opposed to something which is elaborate and artistically brilliant. I may not appreciate that very much, but as long as it is concise and easy to sort of pick, I have a liking or a bias for those things. So unconsciously, probably I try to fit things within a certain real estate, which is half a page or one page max. I think your question was a very good question, Shivguru, because it basically, like I mentioned, it talks about some of the innate qualities. Whether they are good, bad, that's a different story. But I think even a simple thing in terms of how you portray certain pictures in your journal tells a story. That was a very good question, I would say, Shivguru.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the patterns of how each one of us thinks and then what kind of influences the thinking and what do we do with those thoughts. Broadly, that's what I've been trying to understand for so many years. So, yeah, it's always very interesting to have these interactions, which are not always problem solving or a specific a debate where we want to uh, prove a point or establish a point. It's all
Sure.
exploring and yeah, trying to discover together. I think I got a good uh, insights into how you go about planning, and then I also have some pointers that I would also be trying out or looking at how that can yeah, keep me engaged in this activity. Thanks, Mohan, for these wonderful insights and your perspective on the relative benefits of planning and reflecting and all that, and how you have been doing it. I've picked up a few points, and probably my process will also kind of change. Yeah.
Thanks, Shivguru. And It was a pleasure talking to you and bounce some ideas in a free, uninhibited manner.